I'd love it if you would move down and give us a nice little circle of human faces to look at, rather than a big dark empty space that is dotted here and there. If you don't mind, that would be great. I just as you're moving, I just want to say some quick thank yous to people. I want to thank master set creator designer Raymond O'Neill, who's provided us with this beautiful set. Cole, who is doing the live streaming and the lighting and the sound and everything for us here in the theater, which is, we're so fortunate to have this theater as a community hub now, and so many different events. There's an event tonight. You've probably got tickets. I have tickets. I'm not going to scalp them because I understand they're sold out. So I'm delighted to be here, and the one other person I want to mention is, I said I was going to say, and she'll kill me, Hair by Fonda, who is also here in the audience today, who I'm so thrilled is here. So I just want to say, first of all, we're very fortunate to be here. We're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancient ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people who've been living here since time immemorial. We acknowledge the treaties of peace and friendship, and we thank the Mi'kmaq people for their generosity in sharing their land and their space with us. We recognize that this recognition from me and all of us is a very small, but it is a meaningful step in reconciliation and in the continued efforts to build a strong mutual community and a nation-to-nation relationship, because in fact we are all treaty people. So this event today is such a fortunate colliding of a pair of people. Cynthia and I are both the mom of a trans individual, and Cynthia Sweeney, who you're going to meet in one little second, is the co-host of a couple of podcasts, Trans Canada Stories, which we're doing this for, and Hey Sis. And Cynthia and I met. Cynthia, when did we meet? I'm not even sure when we actually met. Here she comes. I'm going to bring you on, actually. Come on. This is Cynthia Sweeney from Hey Sis, and her company is called Simply Good Form, which I love the title of, because it's kind of like saying it's only manners to consider what people want and how people are responded to and what they want to be called. So I think it's a great name for your organization. Cynthia is the founder of SGF, which is Simply Good Form, Inclusion and Educational Consultancy, with a team of transgender inclusion leaders who focus on trans and non-binary equity, inclusion and acceptance. Cynthia's volunteered with PFLAG Canada, which is a fantastic organization, and Cynthia might speak to that a little bit more later. She's a 2S LGBTQIA+ nonprofit since shortly after her son came out as a transgender individual in elementary school. She's been named a finalist for several awards, including most recently the Business Leader of the Year by the CGLCC, which you can tell us, because I don't know what that is. And her mission is building better humans, one conversation at a time, which is pretty great. So, great. That's it.
Sit down here. Thank you, Shelley, and I'm just really honored to be part of this journey for you as a new author.
Thank you.
Adding on to your fabulous accolades as director and writer of Dawn, Her Dad and the Tractor, which we were able to talk to you about that on our former podcast, Hey Sis. Was it a year and a half ago now?
Oh, it's more.
Was it?
It's
okay.
more, yeah.
Time.
The film came out in 2021, and we're in
2023?
Yeah.
Okay, now that we know where we are and what time zone we're in. Yeah, so no, this is just a huge privilege for me when Shelley called me up and asked if I would come down and do a book talk, and so we are live streaming right now. So to anyone that is tuning in, hello and welcome, and thank you so much. We weren't sure what the turnout was going to be today. We've had snow, and people don't have snow tires on. It's a Saturday afternoon, and so thank you so much. This is so nice to see everybody here.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for coming.
I'm going to, I'd just like to say whenever, so PFLAG is a national nonprofit. It's also international, but we're connected with chapters all across Canada. And whenever we start off, we just like to assure everyone that this is a safe space. We speak from first-person experiences, and we're just, here to share some information, celebrate this fabulous novel, Roar, and talk about trans inclusion and the power of storytelling through representation and connection. If you do have a question, I always, as a parent of a trans child, I like to, you can't offend me. You can ask questions in a safe space. I always like to presume good intentions. So. Yeah, with all that started, I would just like to say I love storytelling almost as much as Shelley does, and so I thought we could take you all on a journey today through the pages of Roar, and we could start by this fabulous theme that we will talk about a little bit later on is the ability to breathe throughout the book. So maybe we can just all take a deep breath together, and we'll begin our journey. So Shelley, I love the story. I loved reading it so much. I love the film as well, but through the pages of your novel, I loved being able to get inside the heads of the characters and what everybody was going through, each individual person as a parent, as a sibling, as a neighbor, as a community. It was really, really wonderful. Why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about Roar?
Yeah, some of you know that I made this feature film in 2020 actually, the height of the pandemic. We were the first feature film out of the gate in Eastern Canada. So it was a bit of a steep learning curve. I was a first-time director, so that just added to the learning. I'm kind of sick of learning curves because I keep coming up against them. First movie, first screenplay, first book. It's like, okay, I'm nearly done. But the film was, the screenplay for the film was not a true story, but it was very much based on my experience with my child in rural Nova Scotia and our child, my husband's here too, in rural Nova Scotia, and what we saw in a small community in terms of inclusion for at the point that we knew where our child felt they were sitting at that point, which was just in the LGBTQ community. They were just identifying as gay. So the transformation came a little later. But with the film, film is really an interesting medium, and I have a couple of friends here who are film professionals as well, and they know that it's all about collaboration, and you're never just making a film by yourself. You have so much help, and you have so much you need to do in terms of that collaboration, so many voices you need to hear. And while that's a wonderful, wonderful thing, it also can be at times frustrating and complicated because it's often about compromise. And sometimes as a writer, compromising on a story that is at the center of your heart and what you really want to say and how you really, really feel is really quite difficult. And so we finished the film. The film has gone out. The film has done exactly what I hoped it would do in many ways. It was intended as a family film. It was intended to generate conversations, and it really has done that. And I've been really pleased with the impact and the responses we've had. But I hadn't finished with the characters. They were nibbling at me and chewing at me, and I wasn't done with them, and I felt like what I'd been able to do in the film was not enough. And so I wanted to go back into the story. I wanted to reimagine. I wanted to do a deep, deep dive into what these people's struggles, desires, longings, fears were, and tell a much more detailed story about their backgrounds so that their responses to the young woman who's the center of this story, the young trans woman, we had some context, because sometimes in films you just don't have the context. You see a flat screen and you don't get all the information. So that's where I started.
I think you really accomplished that well. It almost reads episodically in that, you go into a situation and you get one character's point of view, and then in the next chapter it focuses on another character and what went through their mind during the same, that same interaction that had happened, which I just think was so incredible, because Emma Stanley, who is co-host of Trans Canada Stories, is a wonderful trans woman who works with us as well at SGF Inclusion. She couldn't be here today, but we were able to talk to Ronnie Ali, who was a sensitivity reader on the book, along with Veronica Merrifield. And when we were chatting about that, it really came out that this wasn't a story about a trans girl, because there is no one way to transition. There's no one way to be transgender or human. And so this was really a story about family, which I think is powerful, because when the families struggle, and often they do when a young trans person comes out, lack of resources, lack of information, you're starting at, ground zero. There are, so many multifaceted barriers, and you really, were able to bring so many different perspectives into that I think families reading this book, can get a lot out of, and it can really, I think, inspire them and help them with language.
Oh, good, because language was, excuse me, language was a really important part of this book. I love language. I'm interested in language, and I know that when our child was transitioning, language was and continues to be hard. Like, it's hard. I still get things wrong all the time, not necessarily with reference to my child, but in conversation about other individuals who I'm just getting to know, who present in a way that I find challenging. So that language is important, not just the pronouns, but all kinds of decisions, even to speak about certain things, which we have to be careful about what our choices are about what we speak about. And for somebody who's kind of a motor mouth and often engages my mouth before my brain, that's certainly been a challenge. Yeah.
I think about when my child first came out to us, it was a school teacher was reading a book at the time, formerly called George. The book is called Melissa, about a young trans person. And the power of stories to give him that language to understand what he'd been grappling with for so many years. And I remember he came in off the bus after weeks of reading the story, and several times at dinner had been saying, "Mom, did you ever wish you had a boy?" Or, "Mom, if you had had a boy, what would you have called him?" Came into my office and said, "I have to tell you something, Mom, and you have to believe me. And I am something called transgender, and I'm not a girl, and you need to help me, and you need to believe me." They were 10, and they were so small. And I remember I held my breath throughout that whole experience. And then I held my breath for the next weekend of, how do I talk to my husband about this? What do we do? Like, where do we start? And throughout the pages of your book, that theme of breathing, don't forget to breathe, take a deep breath, pause, breathe.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Talk to us about that.
You know what? I won't talk much, but I will read a little segment, because breath has been really important to me, and you're so right. I think we're all aware. And two things you said. This is a book about family, and this is a book about grief and loss. And grief and loss are human emotions, events that we all experience. And when we have a trans child, we understand grief and loss in a different context, in a different circumstances. We realize that we're dealing with our loss of a future we had imagined, our loss of expectations for that individual. And as a mom, I was always I was holding my breath to keep myself from saying things about my loss, because at the moment it wasn't about that, it was about this other individual. So yeah, breath was really important. And in the book, I've tried very hard to incorporate the notion of breath and where that breath comes from. So this first segment is about Miranda, the mum, who didn't appear in the movie but is very, very present in the book. And so you'll hear how she is present. Dawn didn't leave her mother's bedside. Oh, I'm just going to interrupt myself again. Sorry. Two characters in this that you're going to hear from. Jill is Dawn's best friend. She's a young trans woman of color from Uganda, and has been a really good friend and mentor to Dawn. She's on her soccer team. And Jenny is Miranda's best friend, and they've been friends since they were kids, so they've been friends for, 30 years. And Miranda, of course. Dawn didn't leave her mother's bedside. Late in the afternoon, doctors spoke quietly outside the door and then came in to make sure Miranda was comfortable. Nurses checked in, asking Jenny quietly if a chaplain was wanted. That Miranda was going soon was absolutely clear now to Jenny and Jill. Dawn kept telling them that her mum was looking better and better. Never had Jill known such a long day. Minutes that felt like hours, hours that ballooned to nearly bursting, feeling like days or weeks even. Miranda slipped in and out now. Every time she came back to herself, she'd ask, "Where is John Andrew?" Jenny called again. It was getting dark when Jill began to sing quietly. Jill had told Miranda that the best part of college was singing evensong in the college choir. So now she sang softly through every piece she could remember, the alto parts, Walton, Vaughan Williams, Thomas Tallis. Then, pulling words up on her phone, she started on Miranda's particular hero. Miranda moved her head from one cheek to the other. For a moment, absolutely there, she lifted the corners of dry lips and whispered, "Forever young." Then, exhausted by that effort, she closed her eyes to Bob Dylan. And now we switch to Miranda's point of view. The room was dim. She'd straddled this peculiar space all day, feeling Dawn so close, Jenny with her hand on her foot as though she was trying to hold her in the bed, which Miranda felt herself above, observing dispassionately. Jill's voice so gentle in her ear, but also, she thought, surrounding her like the water in the strait near the farm in late summer, just before hurricane season, when it was impossible to tell where you ended and the ocean began. The heat, the blood temperature of it, the beat, beat, beat of the waves, beat, beat, beat in utero. She was swimming, rolling, reaching up and away from the narrow white bed, not her bed, not her home. Where was John Andrew? Tammy. Oh, Tammy would ache for this. She hovered above the women, knowing she couldn't linger, but curiosity kept her there. What next? Dawn and Jill were holding her hands and each other's across her chest, which was so curiously absent, she thought. She'd never got used to having that plateau of bone instead of the gentle roll of her breasts. It's only topography, she thought, and then considered that a strange description of her body now that she'd vacated. Could she let them know how easy it was, like a swim on a summer day? What was she now, she wondered, and then knew. She was breath, she discovered, feeling Jill's song against her ear, Dawn's sighs on her face, all those times when she'd struggled to control it, to hold it, to gather it, and now she was it. Dawn touched her hair, looking up. "Ah," breathed Miranda, thought becoming air, zephyrs all, memory, longing, pain, discovery. Jenny's silk scarf moved as Miranda recalled how they had met. Grade 3, new girl Jenny, friends forever. What is forever? Jenny was wondering. Where is forever? As she turned to see where the draft came from. Ah, Miranda considered again, and knew that now and perhaps forever, was this forever? She could be breath, or wind, or thought. Oh, Donald, Dawn, Donny, Dawn. Oh, Tammy. John Andrew. Oh.
That was beautiful, wasn't it? Oh, this is so powerful. And Miranda, the mom, as the matriarch and trying to hold everybody together through having secretly been going to the city to support Dawn through her transition without everybody else knowing, and that letting go of not being able to hold everybody anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And agony, I imagine, for her. I mean, there's a point later on in the book where Jenny says to Dawn, she says, your mom was holding, she just needed to see you through this.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
That really, that really hit me, the idea of, just needing to be there and needing to protect, or to help protect from the world.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Tammy, and Tammy is Dawn's sister.
Yeah.
And Tammy, has a lot of struggles, like inner struggles, and can be very sort of exasperated at times. With the overlaying of just her personality type, and struggles in coming to terms, and then while also grieving her mother. Why did you write Tammy the way you did?
I love Tammy, and I know Tammy quite well. Somebody asked me, who do you relate to the most of these characters? And I think the characters I relate to a lot are, Tammy and John Andrew. But I'll just read you this. This tells you kind of why I love Tammy. So Tammy says, this chapter is from Tammy's perspective. She knew she wasn't easy, not even at the best of times, and this was definitely not the best of times. She never relaxed, or rather, she never used to relax. Work, home, strain up the ladder, save for a car, buy a car, save for a condo, save, wait, watch, save, work, wait, whatever, and whatever's next. Until Byron. And then something somewhere deep and distant said, take a breath, Tammy. Take a deep, sweet breath. And she did. She relaxed enough to be funny sometimes, and then warm sometimes, and as Byron would say now, to take her prickle off. She took her prickle off and let him in. So he was here with her now after nearly 2 years of reserving her prickle for some of her workmates, who knew that really Tammy was a chestnut, smooth as silk and sweet, sweet, sweet on the inside if you had the patience and dexterity, like Byron, to get through the tiny spikes. And sometimes, and Byron took a lot of pleasure in reminding Tammy of this, it took a lot of patience. So I think perhaps my husband can relate to that element.
Well, it's funny because as I was reading the book, I think Tammy bothered me in certain ways, and I only realized afterwards because I'm so much like her, I think, and would sometimes speak before pausing to think things through. And
oh God, yes.
I love the moment when they're on the bed, Dawn and Tammy, and they've had a bad experience, and Tammy is saying she never wants to be touched again, and she can't deal, and Dawn pokes her on the nose and goes almost like a boop, and then Tammy's like, don't do that, or was it on the shoulder maybe, but I would think my son always did that to me on the nose, but I think it was the shoulder. Don't do this, don't touch me. One more time, and then they kind of collapse and fall to the floor, the bed cracks and breaks, and they laugh, and something broke in that moment, and Tammy's mispronouns, misgenders, and says, I'm never going to get this. I'm never going to be able to get this. And Dawn has just said, wanting to get there is halfway.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
yeah,
I think so. yeah, I think wanting to get there is the big thing. I think the biggest thing for me that I've felt or noticed, and I have, a number of trans friends and have had conversations with people, but I think that the big deal is you just need to, any individual, anywhere, in any circumstance, ever, all they need to be is considered. You just need to be heard and seen, and I think that's the thing. So if people are prepared to take the time and listen and go, okay, that's not my journey, but it's a journey, and it's worth taking the time to consider. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking, because you do have that narrative throughout the book. I'm just trying to find it on my notes where you're talking about tolerance versus, I want to say acceptance, but it wasn't. It was tolerance versus.
Oh, that's Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, when she has arrived back home before the funeral and coming up the driveway, and Dawn has just had an awful experience with a neighbor. The neighbor's pulling down the driveway and says, "What even is that?"
Yeah, and Jenny says, "That's not Annette, that's the child of your good friend," and et cetera, et cetera. And Jenny's extraordinary because Jenny is, the thing when you're writing something is you just fall in love with everybody, And I always thought that was a bit hooga booga, but I know there are other writers in the audience, and I know they'll agree with me, Katerina. That as you have to fall in love with all your characters, even your horrible characters, because you have to let them out and you can't judge them, and but Jenny says. Jenny's really interesting. I wasn't going to read this, but
tolerance versus respect.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
I'm trying. Oh, page 81. I think it was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I can't find it because I didn't mark it Oh, there it is. Tolerance had never been Jenny's strong suit. She could make a list of folks who'd agree, including her ex-husband and her present one. Tolerance was not for this life. Jenny and Miranda had gone back and forth on the idea of tolerance as opposed to respect in relation to Dawn and her community. Complex and revealing conversations that Jenny wished they had been having years before, when she first realized that something was happening with Miranda's youngest child that wasn't going to be easy, something that would have to be respected, not tolerated. This, around the same time she was discovering the difference between tolerance and respect for herself, enough to leave husband number one. But then the world had changed so fast and so dramatically. Me Too and Black Lives Matter upended everything. Nothing was off limits now as far as truth-telling. Jenny and Miranda joked that change was a steel-toed stiletto that kicked their little town from the end of the 1950s into 2020. And it seemed like it happened almost overnight, culminating in rainbow crosswalks in front of the town hall. Some people still stopped traffic in the middle of the block to avoid using them. I'm just going to carry on this one little section because I like it. But of course, it wasn't overnight or over a few months or even a couple of years, and it wasn't easy at all. It fractured the town, and it came with a lot of discomfort and disillusionment, in particular with the church, which sat geographically and symbolically in the heart of the town. Revelation after revelation, tectonic events upending so much. For the good, thought this Catholic girl who'd got herself into trouble, left her family forever, kept her baby, and then lost him in days, and was on that very day reclaimed by the church. She was silent that day, but saved her pain and anger, and when she was old enough to know better, told the parish priest he could go fuck himself in front of his housekeeper, a memory that still brought Jenny satisfaction. She liked to think that housekeeper found the idea of the priest fucking himself a relief, as most of the town knew he'd been fucking her for the better part of 30 years, all the while wringing his white hands over fornication. Well, he was gone now, as was his housekeeper. No one knew where, or if they did, they weren't saying. All the duties of a wife for 30 years, but none of the status. Poor woman. I wasn't going to read that bit, but
Yeah, that was a good surprise. Yeah, no, and there is so heavy topics but humor peppered throughout as well.
And Dawn says to Jenny, "Oh, Jenny, you look so pretty, but you talk so dirty." She's got, that's Jenny. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was interesting, like in that the scene when she's coming into the driveway and the person is coming out, and she ponders like, oh, maybe this person would have reacted better if they had been like warned or prepped ahead of time, and then sort of astutely turned and said, why should we have to pepper or cushion anything for anybody that has nothing to do with them? And that resonated a lot.
Yeah, me too. Why should we be apologizing for our children, our friends, our children, our friends, our like it's nonsense. Yeah.
And it's so timely, this book, because we are in this fractious time right now where there is so much anti-trans sentiment, especially towards youth and children, and parents of children, and the idea of pulling books from schools and rolling back human rights. I think a read like this can help maybe families that might be struggling with that fear in the very beginning to there's so much relatability, I think, in a story like this. I think when my son first transitioned, I went right and found a book. Someone had recommended, someone where I used to live in Ireland connected and said, this was just in our book club. And she knew that our child had transitioned and said, you should read this. And I ended up tattooing the name of a chapter of the book on my arm because it gave me strength, knowing that representation, that there are other families out there that are doing this and can do this. And so important.
Yeah, it is. Conversations, you just got to keep talking. Yeah.
One conversation at a time. And I think that's it. We get so afraid in this, call out culture. We don't want to make a mistake. What happens if we get it wrong? And then we close ourselves off from what can be a really, positive and incredible conversation through that fear. But, I always like to share with people that, my generation, we never talked about gender identity. We never talked about gender identity as your innermost sense of self, from the messages of your brain, and that is very, very different from sexual orientation and gender expression, the way we show ourselves in the world, It was really, I think, and I actually didn't even write down a question, but I think Dawn's relationship and connecting with Banu in the story as well, who is a young queer barista, and how they kind of just found each other right away.
And that was, again, for the writers in the crowd, for me that was fun because Banu just appeared, like she just appeared. They just appeared, and I didn't know who they were, I didn't plan them. As I had started writing, then boom, they were not in the book. And when I first started the first thing, and they kind of arrived, and I went, oh, good, that's good. And it meant that I could create a safe space in that town for Dawn, so that Dawn at least had one place, the cafe, that she knew she could find connections, allies, a place to breathe, and
because it's a queer-owned cafe as well, and everybody knows that it is. It's the only queer-owned place on the main street, and even some of those that maybe that were either transphobic or homophobic or people that just didn't understand and didn't agree, they were still going for a coffee.
They all needed the coffee, so they were all going in there. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about the name of the book, Roar.
Okay, great.
Okay, because there's so. Yeah, well, I think, you can tell us about where that came from. And if, as Roar connected to Dawn, is that something new from the movie? Because,
that wasn't in the movie at all. And it wasn't in the first screenplay. And there's several things in the book there's a lot in the book that was not in the film, that wasn't in the first screenplay, that evolved as I was writing. And I never knew the book was going to be called Roar. I didn't know what the book was going to be called. And then one night I wrote this passage, and then this passage suddenly took on a significance that comes up again and again in the book. So this particular event, which I'll read, is described by Dawn as she comes home, but then it's described later by her father, and we hear his sort of perception of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's described even later as her father has learned to parse this particular event with reference to his daughter's journey. Yeah, so this little segment is, Dawn, we need to keep track of the time, I guess. So somebody needs to go like this.
Wait a minute.
when it's
Time check? 1:42.
Okay, great. So this is Dawn coming back when she's just arriving home for her mom's funeral, hasn't seen anybody yet. The long driveway to the farm was the same. The avenue of enormous sugar maples was nearly unchanged, one gap where a stump remained. Her dad told her once that the trees were probably 200 years old, and that conversation had prompted a grade 6 science fair project. Dawn learned those maples could live for up to 400 years, so theirs were, by maple standards, only middle-aged. Someone in her mother's family, someone in her mother's family had planted those trees one by one down the long drive, imagining what they would become. That, Dawn had always thought, was some kind of miracle, the foresight, the imagination, the faith. The literal roots of her family ran beneath her, from tree to tree, and probably reaching sinewy tendrils into the foundations of the house, tying the maples and the home on land tended for 200 years together. That school project, Dawn thought, as she paused in the gap by the stump, running her hand across the rings and then wondering, front door or back, was probably the most time she and her dad had ever spent working on something together, just the two of them. For years, John Andrew had tried to get Tammy involved in tapping and boiling the syrup. They'd made and bottled buckets of it to give to neighbors and family as gifts, but she wasn't interested. She'd paint or draw the trees, collect their red leaves, and make collages every year, but that was as far as Tammy's arboreal interest went. Dawn and her dad tapped the driveway trees, and then John Andrew took Dawn deep into their woods to a stand of wild sugar maples where they tapped again. They went daily for nearly a month, watching the comings and goings of deer, mink, coyotes, hare, a bobcat. They named him Robert. He didn't come very often. And once, a black bear. Dawn had been dozing, her father sitting in silence, smoking, back when he rolled his own before Miranda put her foot down and the evil weed disappeared. And Dawn felt a dig in her ribs. Nothing said. Her eyes flew open to see a bear, very large, very still, and very close. Too close, watching them. "Do we play dead?" Dawn had whispered. Her dad shook his head no and reached without hurry or apparent concern for a fallen branch near him. Then he rose slowly, unfolding to his full height, his back against the tree they tapped. Dawn crouched at his feet, trembling. The bear stood still. John Andrew, stretched to his full 6'2", stood still. Dawn imagined herself invisible and held her breath. Her dad took a step forward, not looking directly at the bear, but raising the huge branch above his head. The bear looked undecided, then shuffled a step backwards. John Andrew took another step towards the bear, never looking directly at the creature. This dance was agony to Dawn, who was still trying not to breathe. And then her father roared. Not high and sharp, not a yell, but a long, guttural ululation from the deepest part of himself. The bear seemed a little flummoxed, they decided later, and the flummoxed bear made a decision and turned in an unhurried, considered sort of way, taking herself back into the forest. That was her father, whom she'd loved and idolized at 12 years old, fearless bear vanquisher, a mild-mannered farmer who roared to protect his child and himself. If Dawn had heard the conversation later that night when everyone was in bed, the tale having been first presented to Miranda as an encounter with a Winnie the Pooh type character, she would have heard her father, the bear battler, say how frightened he'd been, how his arms had been shaking as he raised the branch, how he knew the situation could end very badly, that he'd never dealt with a bear in his life, how his next plan was to scream at his child to run, run, run while he fought for their lives. Miranda held John Andrew as he told her that their child might have seen their father killed. Dawn would have heard her father say that he roared not because he was afraid. Dawn would have heard her father say that he'd roared because he was afraid, not because he was brave.
It's interesting because as you read that, that fear and protecting his child, and then on the other side of that theme, as parents of, as I always refer to you as like a fellow inclusion warrior, we often hear parents who are advocates and that are like mama bears. And I kind of read like that sort of the theme of the bear being through there as, that I guess basic, like that ability to roar at the injustice that is out there, the fear for what our children might experience or who is going to fracture their humanity on any given day.
Yeah.
And that idea of talking about the bear and John Andrews and sort of his evolution to reconnecting with now his daughter.
Yeah.
Because she does experience some incidences of transphobia and harassment in the book, and he is there for some of it.
Yeah, and that's that. Yeah. Do you want me to read that?
Yes,
bit?
yes. Mm-hmm.
So, and this reflects on that. But we come back to the bear a couple of times in the book. So this little segment is at the funeral home. There's been a wake, which we'll go back to because that's a Tammy thing. But it's at the funeral home, and they've been called to go pick up the ashes. But they don't know that at this point. John Andrews slammed the truck door and started up the steps of the funeral home, but stopped when he heard a young voice nearby shout, "Miss! Miss!" He turned on the top step as Dawn turned toward the voices too. "Hey, miss, hi!" A pause, some quiet chatter and giggling between them, and then, "Is it true you have a dick?" John Andrew froze, focused now on Dawn. The kids turned tail and ran, probably afraid of being recognized. Dawn sat absolutely still, staring forward. He'd felt all kinds of things over the last few days, bereft, confused, angry, mostly. With Miranda for withholding and dying. With Tammy for trying to move him before he was ready. With Byron for taking everything in his stride. And with Dawn for not being his son anymore. Even the prodigal would have been better than this. But would it? He stood still on the top step, caught by that thought. So far, this young woman had more dignity than everyone around her. And even as he thought he was coming to grips with who she was, Dawn was still the source of such pain and such, he knew it wasn't fair, betrayal. She was forcing him, he realized now, to come to grips with who he was. Shit. A narrow-minded bigot he was meeting over and over as he struggled to get his head around what had happened to all of them. Every loss, every secret kept because he wasn't big enough, and Miranda knew it. The wife he'd adored for over 30 years had found him badly wanting. How many other ways, he wondered, had he failed her and failed his kids? Fuck. Now, his child's humiliation and hurt lit a fire in him. Searing anger and clarity sparked by the young assholes, but fueled by his own regrets. Miranda, stop them. They're running away. Let me fucking plow them. He didn't move. They'd shot off laughing, and he'd watched them run, his face flushed, his heart pounding. Now he wished he'd gone after them. They didn't know Dawn, he thought. They don't know anything about this person, who she is, what matters to her, what she's lost or found or sacrificed, the ignorant little shits. He looked at his child, still motionless in the cab of the truck, and wondered if he could ever do anything to make any of this better. And then he went inside. The ride home was silent. A perfectly square cardboard box sat on the armrest between them, the Murray's funeral home logo lit by the rays of gold streaming through the truck's tiny sunroof. John Andrew glanced now and again at Dawn, her face slightly streaked. She hadn't cried in front of him, but he'd been inside with Arthur far longer than he'd wanted. She hadn't spoken since the assault by those little shits. He surprised himself with that word, assault. It was, he discovered, an attack. His stomach flipped and landed in a place he recognized as fear, the same lurch he'd felt when Dawn was young and they'd met a bear when they were tapping maple trees in the wood. He remembered knowing he had to grow. Raising a thick branch above his head, he imagined himself taller than he was, stronger and faster and less afraid. He remembered roaring as if his life depended on it, and it had. He wished he'd scared those kids shitless with a roar. He wished he'd been there to roar at Marty, because clearly what happened last night was also an assault, and these things he was learning weren't casual or flippant or light or, worst of all, unusual for Dawn, and they were hateful, and hate, he knew, was dangerous. He wished he knew if a roar now would make the difference it had made then. No music on the ride home, so John Andrew's thoughts were free range, clucking. If his son had come home from a pub encounter with Marty, he would have said, "Stand up, be a man, don't take that shit from anyone, hit him back, hit him back." He'd have settled in the same place that his father, Miranda's father, Marty's father, had all been comfortable, watching the world and making it work the way they wanted, standing up, bumping chests with each other, pissing up the wall to win, and backing down with excuses and anger at losing face. Anger directed at the smallest, the youngest, the less able or less inclined folks who couldn't or wouldn't defend themselves.
It's shocking, in the moment when you have an opportunity to stand up or call out or defend. And, hands up if anyone has ever been in a situation where, they looked back upon and wished they had said something in the moment, but couldn't find the words, or, maybe they just froze as well. Anybody I know I have, yeah, a lot of hands up there. I remember interviewing Rob Wells, who plays John Andrew in the film, and I asked him that question as well, and he said, yeah, more than once it had happened, but one in particular time they were working on a set and somebody had said something that was offensive to somebody, and he didn't call them out. He didn't say anything.
And I remember that event, yeah.
Yeah, and he said ever since then now he does do it because of that regret that he felt. I mean, he said, the night didn't always end that well, but he never stood quiet again. And it is hard, we try to work to empower people to be allies and to call out bad behavior, even if it's a simple, that's not cool. It's just not, that's not cool. To somebody who thinks that, oh, you're going to laugh at this joke because we're friends and we must have the same idea of what's funny. Something as simple as that can have a profound effect on, future. It gives them something to think about without humiliating them in the moment. But
there's no value. It is hard to find that balance. You can't humiliate people and make them feel like shit because they aren't figuring it out yet, because they haven't come in contact with trans individuals yet because they don't know those people. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do us any good.
No.
So yeah, but finding how you do it, even when you're mad as hell, is really hard.
Yeah, because you don't know who's in the room. And that's, I know my husband has been at work, and a supervisor a few years ago had held up a newspaper. It was an article about non-binary pronouns and that, and she said to him, "Oh, these people, always wanting more." And he stood there in that moment, and she doesn't know that my son is trans, and she's my boss, and what do I do? And I think in the moment he was great, and he just replied, "Well, there's a lot of different people in the world that have a lot of different needs, and I think all we can do is be respectful." But when he told me that, I never forgot it, because it impacted me too, hearing that story and thinking how hard it is if the people we work for, the people we work with, our neighbors and our friends, are judging us and are hateful or have hateful feelings towards us. It's heavy, yeah.
It's very heavy, and it's very heavy at the moment when our largest neighbor to the south is now, there's a travel advisory for my child, for my friends. There's a travel advisory that it's not a safe place to go because, and you just go, what? Like, I don't know. I just don't get it. I don't get it. And, a lot of the time we're speaking to the converted because we're speaking to our friends and we're speaking to the people we care about. But the complexity is, how do we speak to the people who aren't our friends, who we want to understand, who we want to be gentle with, and we want to bring along on this journey, and we want to keep them and their worries and their fears, whatever they are, we want to keep them safe too as they try and figure. It's just hard. Yeah.
Has anyone here ever struggled around pronouns, or maybe being worried about making a mistake, or struggling around maybe inserting gender-neutral pronouns into a conversation? Anybody? I know Emma, who I work with, who is trans, we do videos with our educational work, and she says, yeah, I struggle. I sometimes mispronounce some of my friends, and is working, and that it takes practice because we all make mistakes. And we like to think, if you're coming from a space of wanting to learn and good intention, that often it does shine through. And that when we make a mistake, it's just correct yourself, restate with appropriate pronouns, and then just move on. Don't make a big palaver, because often that puts more discomfort on the person in the situation. But maybe you probably have some more that you'd like to read, and then we could open up for if anyone has any questions.
For some quick questions. So I'll read just quickly, because this is particularly fun, or I think it's fun. So Tammy really is trying to figure it out with her sister, and she's trying to get it right. She's failing a lot. She's also insecure. She's an insecure person. She adores her fella. She knows how fortunate she is to have him. He's a 6'2", handsome young man of color. She was surprised and grateful in a way that her family it was all great in a town where she didn't have any black friends. She didn't have any friends who were from different cultures. So she was scared when she brought him home. And so she got through that. She was worried, and that's all good. And her dad and Byron have bonded, and Byron he's just a breath of fresh air and a sweet individual. But she is still, she's nervous. She's nervous about, is she enough for him, and all those things that we're always nervous about with the people we love early on. But she's also struggling now because she's got this double complexity of her boyfriend, her fiance, and her sister. And she's just, it's like a double whammy just after her mom's died, so she's really off kilter. And they've gone to the wake, and they're just coming in the door, and she turns to her sister and she says, just don't draw attention to yourself. And her boyfriend turns to her and say, get a fucking grip, okay? And so she's been kind of left to watch her boyfriend ally himself with her sister, and she's kind of left on the outside. So this is at the wake, a Cape Breton wake. The wake was a wake. Subdued voices sharing recollections of Miranda, almost all humorous, certainly light and positive, but presented in doleful tones resulting in a weird incongruity. Nothing matched. The photo of Miranda was bright and smiling, wind whipping her hair back, the energy palpable, but everyone in the room was subdued and downcast. So far from what her mother would have wanted, Tammy thought, heading for the punch table. She looked to see where Byron was as she ladled a glass of what looked and smelled like liquefied raspberry jello. There was Byron with Dawn, in a corner with somebody Tammy didn't know, a young woman, really cute, funky hair with a streak of bright green and a face that lit up the place. She was anything but subdued. Tammy wondered who she could be and watched how engaged Dawn was. Byron, too. Her stomach tightened. How engaged was Byron? She twisted her ring. A sudden flurry of chat near the door pulled Tammy around. People were moving aside to let someone in, someone important, Tammy thought, as an aisle appeared, splitting the room, which went silent for a moment, because the important person was Aunt Lainey, the ancient, outspoken, rude, actually, self-appointed matriarch of the family, older sister to Miranda's father, soothsayer, truth-teller, keeper of family secrets, arbiter of family feuds, not that there were many. Lainey felt her age gave her absolute license. At 96, she still lived in her own home, drove her own car at a glacial pace, and took care of herself, so she felt entitled to her own opinions and the right to share them, with vigor and without, in legal terms, any let or hindrance. And here they came. Well, this is pretty dull, Lainey pronounced. Miranda would have hated it. Where's the music? Is there liquor in that punch? Give me a glass. John Andrew moved swiftly, one always moved swiftly after a request from Lainey, to ladle a glass to the brim. Arthur, this isn't a funeral, it's a wake. Where's the fiddles? Arthur scuttled. Tammy had never actually seen someone scuttle before, out of the room. John Andrew handed Lainey the punch and was rewarded with her scrutiny. John Andrew, she paused. Was Lainey considering condolences? I didn't know you had a suit. Another pause, the whole room wondering if she had something kind to say. Is someone feeding you? You're looking peaky. Where are those gadabout children of yours? She looked around. Tammy, Tammy! Tammy moved swiftly to her side, thinking, oh God, she hasn't met Byron yet. What is she going to say? And oh God, Dawn, if Byron thinks my responses are inappropriate. When did you get here? Are you feeding your father? Your mother said you were engaged. I hope he's better than the last one. That was really unfortunate, as the last one, Alex McDonald and his family, were in the room, staring daggers at her now after she and Alex had only just managed to start speaking again. Thanks, Lainey. Ah, Lainey sighed as Byron stepped up beside Tammy. Ah, are you it? She didn't pause for Byron's response. Well, you're a good-looking fella. Strapping. You'll have pretty children, the two of you, that's for sure. Will you earn enough to keep them? She's a princess. Nodding at Tammy. You know that. Byron turned to give Tammy a slightly cool, appraising look. And then Byron nodded back to Lainey with a smile and shook the hand she held out, but she was far from done. Now Lainey was scanning the room, and Tammy knew she was looking for Dawn. Shit. Fiddle music started, loud. There is a God, Tammy thought, and he just turned the fiddles on, so the room wouldn't hear whatever Lainey had to say about Dawn. But fiddles were no competition for Lainey. Now then, her voice easily overpowering the music, come and let me see you. There was no doubt to whom that command was issued. Dawn crossed the room like she was headed to the gallows, stepping in front of her ancient aunt. Well, Lainey's gaze swept Dawn from toes to beautiful eyebrows and lingered there. The world's gone to hell in a handbasket, hasn't it? Silence in the room. Lainey, master of the dramatic pause, practiced her art. And then, you know, pause, shifting all around the room, not a single breath or cough or word. You were the prettiest little boy I ever saw. A sharp intake of breath from the young woman with the green-streaked hair in the corner. And now you're the most beautiful woman, the soul of your mother. The room deflated slightly, an overblown balloon releasing air. Your dad called this morning. Tammy looked to her father, his face inscrutable. He said you were in the barn first thing, never missed a beat, best cow hand he ever had. You'll be a credit to him, to her. Make sure you are. Lainey seemed to grow a couple of inches as she opened her arms. Hug me. Tammy realized she'd been holding her breath, and then the green-haired young woman in the corner let out a strange, strangled whoop, half cheer, half laugh. Dawn reached tentatively towards Lainey, who grabbed her and held her, the grip saying everything anyone needed to hear. This family is family. This family keeps our own safe. Tammy didn't need to put her family back together. Lainey had just done all the heavy lifting.
Did anybody else get goosebumps then when, I always just, when somebody gets it right, who you've thought for sure is going to get it wrong, I think through our entire process, it was always the person it was just surprising. It was never the person we thought was going to get it so wrong. They would surprise us. And in that moment, you just, like this tension.
Yeah.
And the theme of breath and breathing all throughout that chapter. It just carried me along. I really love that. Would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about, so when your son came out, I'm just wondering how many years ago, because I think we've been on our journey for about 7 years now.
I think, I looked to my husband, I think it was about 10 years ago. I think he's 29 now. And I think he started when he was about 19.
And
that's right. Is that right? Yeah.
Did you find family, was there surprises there for you?
There were some great surprises. There were very few bad surprises, I have to say. I mean, it's so easy loving people, isn't it, really? And the best one, which I was really nervous, our son called me up. Should we have a time check? I don't want to keep people too long. Pardon me? Oh, thank you very much. We'll be done by 2:30.
We could go on for days.
We'll be done by 2:30. Teddy had said, our son is called T. Thomas, is his professional name, but his name to us is Teddy. And you might talk about this too, like the name thing was really interesting. Because he chose his own name. But when he chose his own name, he honored my husband's father, who was called Ted, and chose that for his first name. And he always liked the name William. My stepfather his last name was Williams, and he chose that name. But he kept the middle name, which was for his uncle. So he became Teddy William Rose Thomason. And I remember when we kind of find that, it still kind of chokes me up, because it's such a beautiful thing that this child, I spent a lot of time choosing a name for my child when they were a baby, and how important that was, but how much more significant it became when it was their choice and they had, it was pretty cool. So, but he had said to me, we need to tell Oma, that's his grandma, who is my stepmom, and he said, we need to tell Oma, and I just wonder if you could call her and have that conversation. She's not a difficult woman at all. She's a really easy. She's 94 now, and she grew up in Holland during the Second World War. She's a survivor. She's a hugely inspirational but would never believe she is, you know, individual, just because of her gentleness, her kindness, the simplicity of her life, and she's a survivor. And so anyway, I called her and I said, you know, she knew that Teddy was gay already, and that was a thing. I said, well, you know, things have altered, and we just need to let you know this. And I told her in the best way, because I was still learning myself at that point. And I said, you know, and they've chosen the name Teddy. And there was a little quietness at the end of the line, and then she said, oh, poor Teddy, this must be such a journey for him.
Wow. Oh.
First comment, everything right.
Bang.
You know,
whoa.
Bang. And that never changed. It's been pretty stunning, you know, like pretty stunning. And her sister-in-law, who's called Lainey.
Oops. Don't let her read the book.
No, I told her. But the character is not her character at all, but I just like the name. But she's a very Catholic woman, and Teddy went to spend some time with his grandma when she was living in Penticton, and Lainey was there, and he was a little nervous about that. Same thing. This hugely Catholic woman with, you know, concerns about gay people in the church and gay marriage and all kinds of stuff. No issues. No, and you just go, okay, you see, love is love. When you love somebody, when you know somebody, when they're your family and you're trying to make things work, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's not that difficult,
No.
for sure.
Yeah.
Although on that side, thinking back into the beginning, the early days when my youngest transitioned, and they were 10, and so once they knew that we supported them, and there was a name change and clothes change, just general presentation, and then the name as well. We were talking earlier with Kate how they were doing, like, performing self in a way of seeking approval from others, and so they went very machismo in a way. I think they had like Ray-Bans and like the muscle shirts, it was the summertime, and like a Top Gun style haircut, I think at the time. And they were so different. They were just so different, and I was trying to catch up and doing my best to learn everything, but they were so different. For a while, I was so scared because I didn't know how I was going to love them. Like, I didn't know how to love them, because all of a sudden, I guess I was going through a grieving process of this other little person going and taking clothes out of closets and pictures down and all of that, that they were so new. And I was so afraid because I love my kids so much, all three of them. And a few weeks later, or maybe it was a month, it was before we had gotten back to school, I just realized somehow along the way, without me even knowing, my heart had grown and it made space. And I love them more. I love them so much more than I even knew how much I loved them before. It just grew.
Yeah.
And I was so happy, you know, about that, you know, just being so proud of them and loving them. But I think there is that fear maybe at first that, you know, this is somebody that you don't know anymore.
Yeah.
And in actuality, it's not like that at all.
But it does feel like that. It does feel like that at the first part. You go, I'm not sure that I know this. I'm not, you know, because I had a child of one gender, and I had expectations and imaginings for their future that were associated with that gender. But Teddy says to me all the time, our kid is our teacher, and they're a great teacher. I would not have missed this journey for anything in the world, because I have learned more than I ever dreamed I would learn, but also I hope I've assumed a level of humanity and comprehension that I maybe never would have had. And so I'm really grateful for that. And Teddy says all the time, and this is a great thing to think. We live in a time when we're trying to break down what the patriarchy means. And the patriarchy is a problem. It's a problem in so many areas of our world and our life. That isn't to say that patriarchs, men, are bad people or any of those things, but But the patriarchy is a structure that has imposed so much damage on people and so many expectations that need to be reimagined, crashed to pieces, and put back together. Like it just does. And so Teddy talks about the patriarchy and the patriarchy's role in creating all the notions that we have of gender, which are so damaging to all of us and our choices that we make and our assumptions that we have to fit into one side or the other of the binary. And I remember early on, we just kept saying to Teddy at one point, why do you have to jump from one side of the binary to the other? You know, why can't you just be who you are? Why can't? And of course, he is who he is, and there are spaces, you know, around the binary or the whatever that are, you know, somebody is more male than somebody else, somebody is more female. But the point is that the construct that says we must be those things is damaging. It's damaging to us as a society because it limits us, and it's damaging to us as individuals because we don't recognize all the creative and all the bits of us that don't necessarily fit that box. So that's he's teaching us all the time, and it's really interesting to me.
I love how also, you know, doing your part and with the book, you brought on a team of sensitivity readers, a trans woman, and then a trans woman of color as well, just to make sure that, you know, you were getting it right.
Yeah.
And having talked to Ronnie, who was one of the sensitivity readers, and how you wrote the characters, Byron and Jill, who are both Black, and one is a trans person, the other is cisgender, and how much, even through the triggering parts, she loved the representation and wanted more of it. And just, you know, give me more, give me, you know, more descriptors, and really, you know, talk about these characters. And then also with those difficult times that happened, she wasn't bothered by it. She had said that, you know, it was great to see that representation there because that can be my life. That can be, you know, and people need to know this. This is what we experience.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because we're at a point now where we're all shying away from saying anything that we worry might offend somebody, or telling a story that it could be damaging or hurtful or whatever. So there's, you know, there's a fine balance. As a writer, we have to, you know, we have to be sensitive to what stories are ours to tell, and I think we all, you know, we're all super aware of that these days. But also, life is hard. Life is hard. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. You know, those stories, they have to be told, and we can't stop writing stories that tell us what the world is that we live in, you know, just because, you know, people don't necessarily want to look at it. Well, if people don't want to look at it, then they will choose another book, or they'll choose another. But I think we have to understand that we still have to represent the world that we live in. We can't pretend everything's perfect. We can't, or how will we ever know where we came from and are going to? How will we ever know that we've improved? So it's
It's true. With creating, I'm a bit of a pink elephant because with Simply Good Form, I'm the only cisgender person in the company. Everybody is trans and non-binary, and the idea was wanting to elevate voices from within the community, but I needed to do something more than the volunteer work with PFLAG. I needed to make a difference because all the barriers that my son went through, and we went through as a family trying to support him, you know, those statistics that you hear, they all, like, when you look at statistics, like 70% have been assaulted or had suicidal ideation or had been told that, you know, they're not worthy. They often do these studies, and they're for 14 to 25-year-olds, but all of those statistics apply to him by the age of his 12. And then we almost lost him a year and a half ago because of the damage of what had happened to him in those early years. And so, Simply Good Form wasn't created for him, but it was inspired by him to be able to help others and break down these barriers just by having one conversation and trying to open a door and build a bridge of connection, so that hopefully we can eliminate the polarity that exists out there right now. We just need to talk and connect. And remember, we're all human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. And I think probably we should do a time check, but also take some questions. Should we do that?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions, or maybe you've read the book and you wanted to? Yes? Hello?
I was wondering if you could talk about, I feel like I see a lot of like book adaptations becoming films, versus kind of going the other way around, where you were a screenwriter first, and you wrote John or Down the Tractor, and then you wrote them. So wondering what some of the pros and cons of writing that way, how, what were the challenges, and what was really useful about having this film as like a jumping point to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the film was a jumping point. I thought about the film, and I knew that family already, and I knew the circumstance, and I knew the setting, because the book is still set in Antigonish in my head. That's what I see, and I see the places, and I see the landscape, and there's a lot of landscape imbued in the book, but so that was all good, but I was not trying to follow the screenplay. I literally couldn't, the characters literally were not finished with me. And I hadn't told who John Andrew was, really. And I hadn't told who Jenny was at all. And I hadn't told about Jill, So for me, it was just an opportunity to finish with the characters, to develop the characters, to really honor them, and also, I love writing. I've always written. As I said, the film world is it's a collaborative world. And this gave me way more autonomy. I worked with a wonderful editor. I worked with these wonderful sensitivity readers. But ultimately, the decisions were mine. I listened to every single thing my editor said, though, because I loved her so much. And because she was just like, she was fantastic. Whitney Moran at Nimbus, if you ever get the chance to work with her, work with her. She's just great. So yeah, and fortunately, folks who are reviewing it are saying, yeah, this is so different in so many ways. So yeah, did that answer your question at all? Yeah. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah.
Hi, as a future educator, I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions for how to make the classroom more conducive for the transmuting.
That's yours.
Sorry. So sorry, what did you say? You're
Like a future educator.
Oh.
She's in the education department at Acadia right now.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, we do a lot of work with universities and with schools, and we're trying to, inspire educators to be holistic about their approach and recognize that there isn't one day of the year. There isn't one, Pride is not just in summertime. So when you're like creating that safe space in your classroom by sharing your pronouns on day one, putting it up on the board and inviting people to, but it's not mandatory. And then, depending on what you're teaching about, ensuring that you are removing the binary bias from within it, and using diverse examples of diverse people, in science talking about like parrotfish and the chimera butterfly, which are non-binary in nature. In math, using examples like Sally's two mums went to the store to buy apples for Billy's dads, you know, like bringing in that diversity and not assuming that everybody has a mom and a dad. You know, maybe they have foster parents or are being raised by their grandparents. And, you know, always looking at what you're doing through that lens of removing the bias that has been ingrained in all of us, most of us, you know, from the day that we've been born. But those are kind of a few steps of just being really intentional and trying to create that space for somebody in the room that might be feeling like that they might not be accepted. When you remove that bias and you create that space, everybody has that equitable opportunity to thrive. So.
And there's so many good books. In fact, we forgot we were going to do the book. I forgot about that.
Well, on the podcast, actually, when it goes, we are going to be running a contest for the month to give away a copy of the book, but that doesn't mean don't buy the book today.
Yeah.
But we are going to be giving away the book, and also on Wednesday, we're launching the first part of this two-part podcast with our conversation with Ronnie, the sensitivity reader, on Wednesday. So you can look up TransCanada Stories to hear that.
But there are so many great new books for kids, because you're all aware of the book burning that's going on in the States, and those books are on the heap. So there's a book called The Pink Balloon, which is a children's book written by Cynthia.
Yeah.
Is it called The Pink Balloon or A Pink Balloon?
The Pink Balloon, yeah. And it's based on a true story. And it was co-written by Brianna Simons, and it's for families helping to give conversation and language. It's a great little story about a young girl named Briar, and we have an inclusive school reads event that happens every year now. It's happening Trans Awareness Week, which is actually starting November the 13th and runs up to Trans Day of Remembrance on the 20th of November. And what we do with that is we supply lesson plans and activities for that book, but also other really great inclusive books too. And we encourage schools just to reach out to us, and you know, we can help make curriculum approved activities, take that pressure off of teachers, and just give them a turnkey kit and say, get out there and, you know, and have these conversations, introduce children young to the idea, and you'll see them flourish more. Being able to be authentic is just, it shouldn't be a gift, it should be a given.
Oh, that's a good phrase.
I just made that up, actually.
Good phrase.
My ADHD medicine is on today.
Any other questions?
Anything else?
Anybody?
Yeah?
Just a quick one, in case I'm not remembering correctly, but earlier in the story, isn't it Jill that refers to Dawn as Roar?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, you've read the book already?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait. Yay. Yeah, it is Jill. So Roar in the book, it becomes several things. The story of the bear, you know, is spread out. You'll get little sprinkles here and there, and but also Jill, who there's a chapter about Jill early on, is a young person from Uganda who born into a family of boys, but was trans. Went to Kenya, and eventually they were a scholar, and they ended up going to the UK, where they went to college, but they're also a sports person, and so they wind up through a circuitous route in Halifax, where they go to work for an organization. Oh my God, I sound like I'm drunk. Organization, much like the Youth Project, and so they've been working in that place. Dawn comes there to start to volunteer and begins to build community. Jill is a soccer player on a women's soccer team in Halifax. Dawn is clearly a really talented soccer player. She joins that team and becomes the star. But what they discover about her is that when she runs to goal, because she becomes their best striker, she roars. She shouts at the ball as she goes to kick and score. And so the nickname they give her, Jill translates Dawn to Aurora to roar. And so her nickname on the team is Roar.
That's great.
Yeah. Anybody else? Or are we done? Oh, one more.
Please ask if you would be possible inspiration behind the line. She taught me this beyond fear you will find bliss. You, the she, taught that line. I love that song.
I know, it's a beautiful song. Actually, Teddy is coming back he's just moved to Toronto, and we're going to miss him a lot. But he's coming back on the 13th of November because we're doing a show at the Carlton, and Teddy is going to sing that song, among other things. And our friend Ian Sherwood, who's playing here tonight, will also be playing that night. So, yeah, Teddy wrote that song about his parents, which is pretty. I cry every time I hear it.
I do too, and I'm not his parent.
I know, it's crazy. But yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, thanks.
Rhonda.
I know we're here about the book, but you talked about the movie, and I have not seen the movie yet. And I am going to get the book today. But if people do want to watch the movie,
I don't know where you can watch the movie. This is one of the challenges of movie making and the way that collaboration, which is really quite wonderful in many ways, but also can become quite frustrating as well, is you kind of lose a little bit of control. And that was the other thing for me. The book meant that I could manage where and how and what this, I mean, I have a publisher, so they do their thing, but so the movie, I'm not sure where it is. It was on Crave for a while. I know that they're talking about it going back onto Crave. It may be on...
Would Out TV pick
Oh,
it
it
up?
may
I
be
wonder.
on Prime. Somebody told me that maybe it's on Prime.
We'll do a search.
Yeah, I don't know. It is going to be in a couple of other places, but it ain't making our fortune, I can tell you that.
If anyone has any inspiration, local folk artist Jim Tracy made us this fabulous octopus. And we are planning on doing some fundraisers and selling tickets to help support the free programming we do to support trans youth. But we haven't named them yet. And so if you have any ideas on naming them, you could reach out through the podcast or... I don't know, jot it down, let Shelley know, she'll pass it along, but Kate?
Dawn or Death and Tractor available on Prime.
On Prime, okay,
Wow.
fabulous, okay.
That's great to know.
That's great.
Yeah, and just so you know, Kate Brooker here was our Jenny operator on the feature film when we did the film, and so I got to know Kate at that time, and felt very fortunate. Yes? Dawn, Her Dad, and the Tractor. It's a very long movie, a very long movie name. Roar is much better. Yeah.
And you can purchase a copy of your book
Yes,
outside, is that right?
we're going to have, thanks to the market, we're going to have some books for sale outside, and they have their little square and all that stuff, and I'll be signing. So Christmas is coming.
I would love for you to sign my book as well.
And I will do that. So I think we
Thank
can
you.
release you now. But thank you so much for coming today, and just, just have those conversations when you can.
Thank you.
Thank you.